Welcome back to the Grave of the Shadows. Before we begin, a huge thanks for your support. If you love the mystery, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell. Now, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's chilling tale. On the morning of March 15, 1889, the staff at the exclusive Belmont Hotel in Newport, Rhode Island, discovered something that would haunt the city's elite for decades. Room 237, which had been reserved indefinitely for one of America's most celebrated socialites, was found empty. The silken curtains were still drawn. Champagne glasses from the previous night's private gathering stood untouched on the marble table, and a half-written letter lay abandoned on the desk, bearing no signature. Isabella Fairmont, the woman who had once commanded the attention of presidents, princes, and the highest echelons of society, had simply vanished into the March fog. No trace of her remained, leaving behind only the faint scent of French perfume that lingered in the room. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. The disappearance of Isabella Fairmont was not just another case of a missing person. It was a scandal that shook the foundations of high society, unraveling secrets so deep and damning that they would remain buried for over 40 years. In the investigation that followed, it was discovered that 3 prominent families had paid a substantial price to ensure the police records were sealed, ensuring that the full story would never be told. But there was more to Isabella's disappearance than anyone could have imagined. Behind the curtain of her glamorous life and impeccable reputation, there were dark secrets waiting to be uncovered. This is the untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared, leaving behind not just a mystery, but a legacy of intrigue that would echo through Newport's gilded streets for generations. Isabella Fairmont was more than just a name in Newport's high society. She was its reigning queen. With every ballroom she graced and every summer party she threw at her Rosecliff Manor, Isabella cemented her position as one of America's most celebrated socialites. Her beauty, grace, and charm earned her admiration from the wealthiest families, presidents, and even European royalty. She had it all: the glittering life, the admiration, the wealth, and the respect of a city that adored her. But on that fateful morning in March 1889, everything changed. Room 237, once her sanctuary, became the scene of a mystery that no one could have predicted. Isabella's sudden and unexplained disappearance sent shockwaves through Newport's elite. Her empty room, with only faint traces of her perfume lingering, became the first clue in a puzzle that would take authorities over 4 decades to even begin to unravel. At first, authorities believed she had simply fled, perhaps in the midst of scandal or an affair gone wrong. But as the investigation deepened, it became clear that this was no ordinary disappearance. Isabella Fairmont was a woman of wealth and power, and her vanishing was too well planned to be spontaneous. The more investigators dug, the more they realized that her life had been filled with dangerous secrets. Secrets that, if exposed, could topple some of the most influential families in America. What seemed like a glamorous and ideal life for Isabella had been, in reality, a gilded cage. Beneath the surface of wealth and respectability, there were betrayals, lies, and whispers of a dark conspiracy. The socialite who had captivated an entire nation was about to become the center of a story much darker than anyone could have imagined. Before we dive deeper into Isabella Fairmont's mysterious disappearance, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you're intrigued by dark tales and secrets they tried to bury, this is the place for you. We uncover stories that have been buried for generations, and you won't want to miss a single twist in this one. Also, drop a comment below telling us what you think might have happened to Isabella. Could it have been a simple case of runaway love, or was there something far more sinister at play? Your thoughts could shed light on a mystery that has baffled even the most seasoned investigators. So, get comfortable, dim those lights, and let's continue with the untold story of Isabella Fairmont, the socialite who vanished and left behind more than just an empty room. Isabella Fairmont wasn't born into the kind of old-money wealth that made Newport's elite famous. Her story was different. One of new money, old connections, and the magnetic charm that turned heads wherever she went. Born Isabella Catherine Aldridge in 1859, her pedigree combined the solid, reliable bloodlines of Boston's founding families with the rapidly accumulating fortune of a shipping magnate father, Cornelius Aldrich. Isabella's early years were spent in the world of high society, but it wasn't until her marriage to Theodore Fairmont in 1878 that she truly gained entry into Newport's most exclusive circles. Theodore, heir to a vast Pennsylvania steel fortune, was everything one could want in a husband: dependable, serious, and wealthy. Their marriage was nothing short of a spectacle, the wedding of the decade that cemented Isabella's position in Newport society. Together, they made Rosecliff Manor their summer home, a sprawling 70-room mansion filled with marble imported from Italy, gardens meticulously designed to showcase their wealth, and a staff of 20 to maintain the estate. From that moment forward, Isabella's life became synonymous with Newport's Gilded Age. Each summer, her parties were the stuff of legend, where politicians rubbed elbows with European royalty, senators forged business deals over champagne, and an invitation to her soirees was seen as an automatic ticket into the inner circle of high society. Her keen eye for style and her infectious enthusiasm for the arts helped fund Newport's first proper theater, and she personally handpicked the European musicians who performed at her private soirees. The local newspapers ran a weekly column titled Mrs. Fairmont's Week, detailing everything from her charitable activities to the latest haute couture she wore. In this carefully constructed world, Isabella Fairmont was not just a woman. She was the epitome of success. Her every movement was followed by journalists, her every word analyzed for insight into the world of the rich and famous. No one in Newport was more admired or more envied. She was the social queen, the toast of every high-profile gathering, the woman whose presence could make or break a reputation. However, with great influence came great scrutiny. Isabella's world, like all worlds of the rich and powerful, operated under a constant threat of scandal. Reputation in Newport wasn't just an accessory. It was everything. For those in high society, reputation was a delicate dance. One misstep, and a person's entire career could come crashing down. The same high society that had elevated Isabella to near godlike status was also the same one that would happily watch her fall if her impeccable reputation faltered. By 1884, whispers started to swirl about Isabella's personal life. Whispers that would soon grow into something much louder and far more damaging. It began innocently enough. The rumor that she had been seen dining alone with Jonathan Pembroke, a dashing young architect who had been commissioned to design additions to several Newport mansions. Pembroke was everything that Isabella's established social circle was not. He was a man of passion, mystery, and intensity. His dark hair perpetually fell across his forehead in a way that made society matrons fan themselves nervously, and his green eyes were said to have the uncanny ability to see straight through the pretensions of Newport's elite. Pembroke had only recently arrived in Newport, but his reputation quickly grew. He had worked on architectural projects for steel barons in Pittsburgh and had restored colonial estates in Virginia. But it wasn't his architectural expertise that had people talking, it was his personal magnetism. Pembroke wasn't just a young architect. He was a man who stirred something deeper in the hearts of those around him. And for Isabella Fairmont, a woman who had seen the world and was used to captivating attention wherever she went, there was something irresistible about Pembroke that no one could quite explain. The first meeting between Isabella and Jonathan Pembroke happened during a committee meeting for the proposed expansion of Trinity Church. Isabella, ever the social strategist, had been reviewing architectural plans when Pembroke entered the room. It's said that their eyes met across the mahogany conference table, and an electric tension filled the air. What began as a professional interaction soon evolved into something much more personal. Before long, Pembroke was a frequent visitor to Rosecliff Manor, under the guise of consulting on renovation projects. The mansion staff, who had been trained in discretion, began to notice things. The way Isabella's laughter seemed to carry differently when Pembroke was around, the frequency of his visits, and the private conversations they shared. These subtle signs didn't go unnoticed by those who worked closely with her. But the true nature of their relationship wasn't just a rumor. It was an undeniable attraction that started to consume them both. Isabella, it seemed, was no longer the woman who could do no wrong. Her once perfect life began to show cracks that would widen with each passing season. Theodore Fairmont, so focused on the growing steel empire that had made him wealthy, seemed oblivious to the growing attachment between his wife and Pembroke. He approved of Pembroke's architectural work, praised Isabella for choosing him as the contractor, and never once questioned the nature of their friendship. But others in the social circle were paying attention, and they were watching Isabella with a critical eye. By the summer of 1884, whispers began to evolve into certainty. The rumors about Isabella and Pembroke's relationship were no longer subtle. They had become the talk of Newport. The facade that had once protected Isabella was slowly beginning to crumble. She may have been adored by many, but it was becoming clear that even the brightest stars could fall. This affair was no longer something hidden behind closed doors. It was about to take center stage for all of Newport's elite to see. By the summer of 1884, what had begun as a whisper in the halls of Newport's grandest mansions was now an undeniable truth. Isabella Fairmont was having an affair with Jonathan Pembroke, the young architect whose charm and magnetic presence had captured her heart. The whispers that had once been dismissed as rumors were now being spoken openly at the most prestigious social gatherings. Where once Isabella had been the darling of Newport's elite, she was now a subject of hushed conversations and stares. It all started innocuously enough, a dinner here, a private conversation there. But by the end of the summer, the evidence had become too overwhelming to ignore. Isabella and Pembroke had been seen together more often than could be explained by mere professional meetings. They had been observed dining alone, walking through the gardens of Rosecliff Manor with their heads bent together, their conversations intimate and filled with the kind of quiet intensity that only lovers share. One of the most damning moments came when Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt's personal maid reported seeing the two of them in a passionate embrace in the conservatory during a private dinner party. The maid, whose loyalties lay with the Vanderbilts, immediately spread the word throughout Newport's social circles. A single observation of such intimacy was all it took to turn the tide against Isabella. Her actions were no longer hidden in the shadows. They had become an open scandal. As summer faded into fall, Isabella's life was no longer her own. Where once she had been invited to every social event, her invitations began to dwindle. Former friends, those who had once sought her out for influence, began to adopt a cooler tone in their conversations. The kind of welcome she had once received with open arms now seemed increasingly strained. The very society that had built her up now began to tear her down, and it became painfully clear that in Newport, reputation was everything. Isabella, however, seemed unfazed by the growing storm. She continued to meet with Pembroke, her public defiance a testament to the passion that had overtaken her. Her behavior grew bolder by the day, as if daring society to confront her directly. This defiance, though, which might have been seen as a sign of strength in other circumstances, only served to accelerate her fall from grace. The more the whispers turned to accusations, the more Isabella seemed to embrace her scandalous behavior. By September 1884, the whispers had crystallized into a full-blown public spectacle. Society columnists in local newspapers had caught wind of the affair, and soon, the story was splashed across the pages of the Newport Herald. The headline read, "Newport's Fallen Angel," and the column, penned by an anonymous journalist known only as Observer, detailed every intimate moment that had been shared between Isabella and Pembroke. The article laid bare their relationship, the clandestine meetings, the letters exchanged, and the places they had been seen together. But the Herald's expose didn't stop at mere gossip. It revealed much darker truths. The journalist suggested that Isabella's involvement with Pembroke wasn't just a romantic entanglement, but a financial one as well. According to the column, Isabella had been providing Pembroke with substantial sums of money, drawn from her personal accounts. The article even hinted that she had secretly sold several valuable pieces from the Fairmont art collection to fund Pembroke's debts. The suggestion that Isabella, a woman who had once been revered for her charity work and impeccable taste, was now involved in something far less noble sent shockwaves through Newport's elite. For Theodore Fairmont, this was a blow that cut deeper than any betrayal. His wife had not only been unfaithful, but she had also, it seemed, been swindled by a man who had been using her for his own gain. The humiliation was compounded by the realization that his business associates, his social peers, and even the household staff had all been aware of the affair while he remained in ignorance. The facade that he had carefully built around his family's reputation was now crumbling piece by piece. The confrontation between Theodore and Isabella took place in the library of Rosecliff Manor on the evening of October 13, 1884. According to Theodore's later testimony, he initially confronted Isabella with the allegations, showing her the evidence of the financial transactions between her and Pembroke. Isabella denied the affair at first, but when presented with the bank records and evidence of the money transfers, she broke down and confessed. She admitted to the relationship but insisted that her feelings for Pembroke were genuine. She maintained that she had given him money out of love, not manipulation. Theodore, however, could not accept her version of events. He demanded that she immediately end her relationship with Pembroke, return to Boston for the winter season, and submit to a period of social rehabilitation that would allow them to restore their reputation. The idea of staying in Newport in the face of the public scandal was no longer an option. For Theodore, this was about salvaging what little remained of their dignity and social standing. But Isabella, far from being repentant, refused. She declared that her marriage had been a mistake and that she no longer loved Theodore. Her love for Pembroke, she claimed, was genuine, and she intended to seek a divorce. The scandal that had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled over. The social order that had once embraced Isabella now turned against her with an unforgiving cruelty. For Theodore, the confrontation was a turning point. He had trusted his wife, believed in the social contract they had both so carefully crafted. Now, faced with a situation that could ruin him, he had no choice but to act decisively. But the damage was done. The once vibrant socialite, whose every move had been celebrated, was now the center of a scandal that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. The fallout from the affair quickly escalated, but it wasn't until October 12, 1884, that Isabella Fairmont's life would change irreversibly. The scandal broke wide open in the most public and humiliating way possible, through the morning edition of the New York Herald. A society columnist known only as Observer published a detailed account of Isabella's affair with Jonathan Pembroke under the headline, "Newport's Fallen Angel." The article painted a damning picture, not just of Isabella's romantic involvement with Pembroke, but also of the financial web that had tied them together. The columnist claimed that Isabella, in a desperate bid to finance Pembroke's gambling debts, had been funneling money from the Fairmont family's accounts. According to the piece, valuable pieces of artwork, including a diamond necklace that had belonged to Theodore Fairmont's mother, had been sold off under suspicious circumstances, far below their appraised value. But the most damaging revelation came when the columnist exposed Pembroke's dark past. He wasn't just an architect with a penchant for romantic liaisons. He was also a man with substantial gambling debts and a history of manipulating wealthy women. The journalist claimed that Pembroke had been exploiting not only Isabella but several other high society women across the country, targeting them for their wealth before disappearing once their fortunes were drained. The article set Newport's high society on edge. What had once been a whispered scandal was now an open, public disgrace. The details of Isabella's affair with Pembroke were no longer private. They were plastered across the newspapers for the world to see. But what was even more devastating was the suggestion that Isabella, once known for her generosity and elegance, had been financially manipulated by a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. The impact on Theodore Fairmont was immediate. The man who had once proudly walked by Isabella's side, secure in his position at the top of Newport society, now found himself caught in a public scandal of the highest order. His business associates, once supportive and respectful, now distanced themselves. Invitations to important events stopped arriving, and whispers of divorce began to spread like wildfire. His social standing, so carefully built over years of hard work and investment, was unraveling before his eyes. Theodore confronted Isabella the following evening in the library of Rosecliff Manor. His face was drawn, his eyes tired from the weight of the past 24 hours. According to later accounts, Theodore presented Isabella with the evidence: a stack of bank records showing the money transfers, a list of sold artwork, and the article from the Herald. He asked her for an explanation, hoping against hope that it was all some kind of misunderstanding. At first, Isabella denied the affair, her shock and disbelief palpable. But as Theodore pressed her with the evidence, her defenses crumbled. The truth, it seemed, had finally come to light. Isabella admitted the affair, but she claimed that her feelings for Pembroke were genuine. She wasn't being manipulated, she said. She had given him money because she loved him, not because she had been tricked. But Theodore, devastated by the evidence of betrayal, could not accept this version of events. The confrontation became an emotional battleground. Theodore demanded that Isabella end the relationship immediately and return to Boston for the winter, where they could rebuild their reputation in the eyes of Newport's elite. He even suggested that they take a break from the public eye, engage in some form of social rehabilitation, and eventually restore the family's image through charitable acts and strategic appearances. Isabella's response, however, shocked him further. She rejected Theodore's offer outright, declaring that her marriage had been a mistake from the start. She no longer loved him. Her love, she said, was with Pembroke, and she was determined to seek a divorce. This was the final straw for Theodore. The man who had once been so certain of his family's place in society now found himself standing on the precipice of ruin, his reputation destroyed by his wife's defiance. As the hours passed, the tension in the library escalated. The household staff, who had been quietly listening from the other side of the door, later reported hearing the sound of raised voices, followed by the unmistakable noise of doors slamming. When Theodore finally emerged from the library, his face was pale, and his eyes carried the weight of a decade's worth of pain. Isabella, however, wasn't finished. The next chapter of her story was about to begin. She left Rosecliff Manor in the dead of night, a woman consumed by defiance and desperation. She had already made her decision, one that would leave a mark on Newport society for years to come. The aftermath of Isabella's public scandal was swift and brutal. Within days of the New York Herald's explosive exposé, Newport's glittering social circles began to fracture. Where Isabella had once been at the center of every gathering, now she found herself a pariah. Invitations to the most coveted events stopped arriving, and even those who had once called her friends now greeted her with cold indifference. The glamorous socialite who had reigned over Newport's summer season was now a woman whose mere name was enough to ruin reputations. The loss of social standing was only the beginning of her fall from grace. Isabella's relationship with Theodore, already strained, now seemed irreparable. The confrontation in the library at Rosecliff Manor had been the tipping point. Theodore, once a proud man, now found himself caught between the desire to protect his family's reputation and the very public collapse of his marriage. The humiliation was overwhelming, especially as the details of Isabella's affair, the money transfers, and the sale of valuable artwork had become common knowledge in high society. In the weeks that followed, Theodore attempted to salvage what he could. He demanded that Isabella end her relationship with Pembroke and return to Boston, where they could attempt to rehabilitate their tarnished image. He suggested they spend the winter season away from Newport's prying eyes, perhaps allowing the scandal to die down in time. But Isabella, whose heart was now set on Pembroke, refused. She declared that her marriage had been nothing but a mistake and that she had no intention of staying with Theodore. For Isabella, the decision was final. She was no longer willing to live in the shadow of a marriage that no longer served her. She had tasted the thrill of real passion, and in Pembroke, she had found something far more intoxicating than the social obligations that had once defined her life. She was willing to sacrifice everything: her reputation, her marriage, and her place in society, just to be with him. But Pembroke, as it would turn out, had his own plans. He was far from the man Isabella had imagined him to be. After their affair was exposed, Pembroke disappeared from the scene almost as quickly as he had entered it. The man who had once promised Isabella a future of romance and adventure now seemed to vanish without a trace. Isabella, heartbroken and lost, found herself standing alone amidst the wreckage of her once glittering life. As she tried to pick up the pieces, the full scope of her betrayal became undeniable. The evidence of financial manipulation, the money she had given Pembroke, and the sale of family heirlooms were not just scandalous. They were deeply damaging to her reputation. The public, who had once adored her, now saw her as a woman willing to sacrifice everything, including her family's wealth and legacy, for a man who had never truly loved her. By November 1884, Isabella's situation had become untenable. She had lost the support of the Fairmont family, the respect of her peers, and, most devastatingly, her own sense of identity. The woman who had once been the queen of Newport's high society was now a shadow of her former self, shunned by the very people who had once lavished her with attention. Isabella's pride and defiance, which had once been her strength, now seemed to trap her in a lonely and isolated world. The public scandal had taken its toll, not just on her marriage, but on her very soul. Theodore, despite his humiliation, took steps to protect his own interests. He consulted with legal advisors and worked behind the scenes to ensure that the public fallout did not destroy his business empire. He kept his distance from Isabella, preferring to retreat into his work, but the emotional toll of her betrayal weighed heavily on him. He began to make preparations for a life without her, although the pain of her departure never fully left him. But Isabella, who had once been the darling of Newport society, found herself in an even darker place. Despite her defiance, there were moments of vulnerability. The life she had built with Theodore, the social status she had cultivated, and the family wealth she had once enjoyed all seemed to slip away with each passing day. And the worst part was that she had no one to turn to. In December 1884, Isabella made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. She disappeared. The woman who had once captivated the attention of an entire nation now vanished without a trace. No one knew where she had gone, and despite the authorities' best efforts, Isabella Fairmont was never seen again. As the investigation into her disappearance unfolded, it became clear that there were far more layers to this story than anyone had realized. The authorities began to uncover strange inconsistencies in Isabella's final days. She had made arrangements to leave Newport, but at the same time, her personal belongings were left behind, as if she had simply walked away. Letters that had been written in her hand appeared to be unfinished, and certain documents, including a final will, were missing. The truth about Isabella's disappearance would remain a mystery for years to come. But one thing was certain: the story of the once immaculate socialite's fall from grace had only just begun to unfold. Isabella Fairmont's disappearance remained an enigma for several weeks. Despite a thorough investigation by both local authorities and private detectives, no solid clues surfaced. Newport's elite, while they had been eager to distance themselves from the scandal, now found themselves gripped by the mystery of what had happened to the once revered socialite. Her vanishing wasn't just the end of a personal drama. It had become a public spectacle that left the city reeling. The authorities initially assumed that Isabella had simply left Newport in a desperate bid to escape the scandal. Some speculated that she had gone into hiding, perhaps to await the storm to pass or to begin a new life abroad. But there was no sign of her in any of the cities she was known to frequent. Neither her personal staff nor Theodore's investigators could locate her, and the fear began to grow that something much darker had occurred. Then, in early December 1884, a breakthrough came, but not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't the police who uncovered the truth. It was an anonymous letter that arrived at the Newport Police Department. The letter, written in a neat, elegant script, contained a chilling revelation. It claimed that Isabella had been last seen in the company of two men, whose identities were unknown. The letter described a clandestine meeting between Isabella and these men on the night she disappeared, an encounter that seemed to have been carefully orchestrated. The letter's writer, who claimed to be an eyewitness to the meeting, described Isabella's demeanor as calm but distant. She had been wearing the ruby brooch that had become infamous in the weeks following her disappearance, and the two men had handed her an envelope just before she left. The writer suggested that Isabella was not fleeing on her own volition, but rather was being escorted under duress. Following this revelation, the police launched a new investigation into the men described in the letter. They found that two of Newport's most prominent families had hired a private security firm, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, to monitor Isabella in the days leading up to her disappearance. The connections between Isabella's affair with Pembroke and the families that had sought to cover up the scandal were becoming clearer. But the most chilling discovery came when the investigation led them to a hidden compartment within one of Newport's grand mansions. In February 1890, nearly 5 years after Isabella's disappearance, the search for answers finally took a dramatic turn. Detective Samuel Harrison, who had been leading the investigation, obtained a warrant to search the cellar of the Peton Mansion, a sprawling estate owned by one of the wealthiest families in Newport. The mansion, known for its opulent design and secretive nature, was rumored to have hidden compartments built into its structure. These rumors were confirmed when Harrison's team discovered a hidden chamber beneath the wine cellar. What they uncovered inside that chamber would send shockwaves through Newport and forever change the course of the investigation. Isabella Fairmont's lifeless body was found wrapped in an expensive silk cloak, her once beautiful face now pale and unrecognizable. The ruby brooch that had been so prominently featured in photographs of her was still pinned to her garment. A quick examination by the coroner confirmed that Isabella had died from poisoning, specifically chloral hydrate, a substance commonly used to incapacitate victims before they were murdered. But the true horror came when the authorities discovered the circumstances surrounding Isabella's final moments. The walls of the hidden chamber were lined with lead, effectively making it soundproof. Evidence suggested that Isabella had been alive when she was placed in the chamber, and that she had attempted to escape, her hands scraping against the walls in a desperate attempt to free herself before the poison took its full effect. The investigation revealed that Isabella's murder was not a random act of violence, but a premeditated conspiracy orchestrated by several prominent figures in Newport society. The 2 men who had escorted her to the Peton Mansion were later identified as agents from the Pinkerton Detective Agency, hired not to protect Isabella, but to silence her for good. These men, acting on the orders of those who feared the exposure of their secrets, had drugged Isabella and placed her in the hidden chamber to die. In the aftermath of the investigation, several prominent individuals were arrested, including members of Newport's wealthiest families, who had been complicit in Isabella's death. The families had orchestrated her murder to prevent her from revealing the corruption that ran deep within their ranks. Isabella's claim that she had discovered their illegal dealings in architecture, land acquisition, and tax evasion had made her a target, one they would stop at nothing to eliminate. Despite the arrests and the damning evidence, justice would never fully be served. Key witnesses mysteriously disappeared, and vital evidence went missing, likely destroyed or hidden by those with the means to manipulate the legal system. The criminal cases against the conspirators collapsed one by one, as lawyers and private investigators worked tirelessly to discredit the evidence and delay the trial. Isabella Fairmont, despite her tragic and untimely death, had succeeded in one thing. She had exposed the underbelly of Newport's gilded elite. The documents she had hidden, which contained proof of the corruption and criminal activity she had uncovered, eventually surfaced in the most unexpected way, decades after her death. Isabella's final act of defiance, hidden in plain sight, ensured that her story would never truly be buried. Her courage, even in the face of death, became a symbol of the lengths to which the powerful would go to protect their secrets, and the price that would ultimately be paid for their sins. The murder of Isabella Fairmont, though officially buried by the powerful families of Newport, left an indelible mark on the city and its history. The socialite, once adored by all, became a tragic symbol of the corrupting influence of wealth, secrecy, and betrayal. Her life, filled with glittering parties and admiration, ultimately proved to be the perfect cover for the dark conspiracy that lay beneath the surface of Newport's elite society. Isabella's courage, even in the face of impending danger, forced the powerful to reckon with their own secrets. Her accusations, though they led to her untimely demise, were not completely erased from history. The documents she had gathered, proof of widespread corruption, surfaced years later, validating her claims and confirming what she had feared. The people she trusted had been willing to kill to protect their empire. But even as the families involved in her death faced ruin and scandal, Isabella's true justice was never fully realized. The legal system failed her in ways that were both shocking and disheartening. The victims of her sacrifice, those who had been ensnared by the same web of lies, were left with their own versions of justice, far too late to save her. Today, the story of Isabella Fairmont serves as a reminder of the darkness that can exist behind the facades of wealth and privilege. It teaches us that even the most dazzling lives can hide the most dangerous secrets. And while the powerful may have thought they buried Isabella's truth with her, her story continues to resonate, leaving us all with a chilling question. How many more untold stories are buried in the shadows, waiting to come to light? If you found Isabella Fairmont's story as chilling and thought-provoking as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Stories like this, filled with secrets, betrayals, and untold truths, are exactly what we explore here at the Grave of the Shadows. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves dark historical mysteries and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think the powerful families of Newport were ever truly held accountable for Isabella's murder? Or were their crimes buried forever? We'd love to hear your theories. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the hidden corners of history. Until next time, remember, some stories are too dangerous to be forgotten. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll meet again in the next tale from the Grave of the Shadows.